Malik Henderson sat in first class. A sharp navy suit, quiet confidence. He had flown Vanguard Air's Flight 482 many times before. Always the same routine, always the same excellence. He had pre-ordered his meal: ribeye steak, truffle risotto, Cabernet Sauvignon, the signature first-class experience, just like every other time. But when the flight attendant returned, her expression wasn't professional. It was apologetic, nervous. "I'm sorry, sir. We've run out of your meal." She placed a small plastic-wrapped turkey sandwich on his tray. No garnish, no apology worth remembering. At first, Malik said nothing. He had built his entire career on staying composed, on knowing when to speak and when silence said more. But something inside him shifted. This wasn't just an oversight, it was deliberate. The coldness in her tone, the dismissive shrug, the way she avoided his eyes, while the other passengers, all white men in tailored suits, enjoyed their steak and wine. He wasn't just another passenger. He wasn't just another CEO. He was the only black man in the cabin, and he could feel it. This wasn't about a meal. It was about being underestimated, disrespected, dismissed. Again. And Malik Henderson wasn't the type of man to let that slide. What happened next would change far more than his dining experience. It would change careers. It would change Vanguard Air. Keep watching to see how one moment of quiet disrespect turned into a career-ending power move. If you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time. Trust me, you'll want to see how this story unfolds. Malik Henderson, a man who didn't just break barriers, he shattered them. Born and raised in Newark, New Jersey, the son of a postal worker and a school teacher. By 25, he had 2 degrees and a startup that most investors ignored. By 35, he had built Henderson Strategic Holdings, a powerhouse in international logistics. By 40, he sat on boards where no one who looked like him had ever sat before. He didn't just earn his place in first class. He owned it. But here's the thing. Success never stopped the looks, the assumptions, the quiet tests to see if he really belonged. Every boardroom, every gala, every first-class cabin. Someone always tried to remind him where they thought he should be. And for years, Malik let it slide. Because he knew power didn't come from reacting. It came from responding, with strategy. But this turkey sandwich, this wasn't just an inconvenience. It was Vanguard Air, a company he had supported and promoted, telling him without words, "You don't matter as much as they do." And this time, he was ready to respond. Vanguard Air Flight 482 hummed steadily as it climbed to cruising altitude. Malik leaned back into the leather seat, but his mind didn't settle. Not this time. The cabin was quiet, too quiet. The kind where every small detail screamed louder than words. To his left, 2 executives from a European hedge fund laughed over glasses of champagne. To his right, a silver-haired attorney adjusted his cufflinks and unfolded his meal. Filet mignon, still steaming, garnished perfectly. Malik's eyes dropped back to his tray. The turkey sandwich, plastic wrap still clinging to the bread like it belonged in a school cafeteria, not a luxury airline cabin. The water, lukewarm, not even the sparkling water he had requested. At first glance, it looked like a minor inconvenience. But to Malik, it wasn't just about food. It was the symbolism. The message wasn't new. It had whispered to him before in fancier rooms than this. You should be grateful to even be here. But Malik didn't do gratitude for crumbs. Not when he had earned a seat at every table he'd entered. Not when he'd built partnerships that had saved Vanguard's supply chain during the pandemic. Not when he knew, without arrogance, just fact, that he brought more value to this airline than most of the men sipping champagne beside him. And yet, here he was, the only black man in first class, served a meal that told him he was an afterthought. But here's what the flight attendant and Vanguard Air didn't know. Malik Henderson never reacted in the moment. He studied, he observed, and then, when the time was right, he moved. While the other passengers leaned back into comfort, Malik quietly powered on his tablet. 3 swipes later, he opened his secure corporate app. Message: Jared, initiate Flight 482 protocol. Crew manifest. Full incident log. Quietly. Jared Cross, his chief of staff, didn't need a second explanation. They had a protocol for this, a process built not out of pettiness, but protection. Because this wasn't the first time Malik had been disrespected in elite spaces. But if Vanguard thought this would be the last time he let it slide, they were about to learn who they were dealing with. The flight attendant never came back. Not to explain, not to apologize, not to offer so much as a replacement drink. She disappeared into the galley as if the matter was closed. Malik glanced toward the curtain separating first class from business. She wasn't checking on other passengers. No, she was avoiding him. Meanwhile, the others reclined deeper into their seats. Their meals served flawlessly, their glasses refilled without asking, their comfort uninterrupted. Malik wasn't angry, not in the way people expected. He was focused, calculating. This wasn't a customer service error. It wasn't a kitchen mix-up. It was the kind of silent exclusion Black professionals knew all too well. The kind that wasn't loud, it wasn't obvious, but it cut just as deep. And Malik had learned long ago, it wasn't about this one meal. It was about patterns. The small, deliberate ways people told you, you don't belong. He tapped his tablet again. Jared's reply flashed on the screen. Copy. Crew manifest pulled. Lead attendant, Sandra Whitmore. History of prior complaints. Of course. It was never just a one-time thing. Jared's next message arrived seconds later. Reports dating back 18 months. Same attendant. Discriminatory treatment flagged by multiple passengers. No action taken by Vanguard HR. Malik exhaled slowly. So, this wasn't just his fight. It had been happening to others, quietly, systemically, and it had been ignored. The crazy part? Sandra Whitmore probably thought today would be no different. Another slight, another silent passenger. But Malik wasn't silent. He was strategic, and Vanguard Air had just made the worst kind of mistake. They underestimated a man who had built his entire empire on turning disrespect into leverage. The hum of the engines was steady, masking the quiet storm building in Malik's mind. Passengers sipped wine. Some drifted into light sleep beneath cashmere blankets. The cabin was calm, on the surface. But beneath that calm, Malik's next move was already unfolding. He typed another message to Jared. Pull Vanguard's HR response logs. Any previous internal resolutions on Sandra Whitmore. Check if management signed off. Because here's what people like Sandra never realized. They thought their actions stayed small, contained. A slight here, a brush off there, a cold tone, a dismissive gesture. But for every silent victim they overlooked, there was eventually one who knew exactly how to respond. Malik wasn't just thinking about the meal anymore. He was thinking about the passengers who hadn't had his resources, his influence, the ones who had filed quiet complaints, hoping for justice, only to receive templated apologies and nothing more. And now, that silence was about to end. Jared's next update buzzed through. 2 prior investigations, both closed with no disciplinary action. Last complaint filed 3 months ago. Passenger was offered flight credit. No follow-up. Flight credit. That's what Vanguard gave people in exchange for dignity. A $50 voucher for the price of being disrespected. Malik's jaw tightened. He wasn't going to ask for credit. He wasn't going to demand an apology. He was going to expose the rot they had covered up for almost 2 years. And by the time Flight 482 touched down, Sandra Whitmore, and the managers who protected her wouldn't just lose their jobs. They would become the example. As Flight 482 soared over the Atlantic, Malik's strategy shifted gears. This was no longer about a meal or a rude attendant. It was about accountability, systemic, undeniable accountability. He leaned forward, voice low, and called over a different flight attendant, a younger man, nervous but polite. "Yes, Mr. Henderson? I'd like to speak with the lead cabin supervisor." Quietly. The young attendant nodded, eyes wide. No hesitation. Within moments, a man in his early 50s approached. Silver name tag, crisp uniform. He introduced himself as Nathan Price, the flight's senior cabin supervisor. "Mr. Henderson, I understand there was a meal issue. I sincerely apologize." Malik raised a hand gently. "I'm not here for apologies." Nathan froze. "I'll need the crew ID numbers and confirmation of the in-flight service records. And," Malik added, voice even, "please notify your corporate liaison in London. They'll want to meet this flight upon arrival." The supervisor's expression shifted from polite concern to controlled alarm. I'm not sure I can release that information mid-flight." Malik didn't blink. "You can. And you will. I believe Vanguard's executive policies allow for high-tier partner audits under Clause 14.6. Nathan's mouth opened slightly. No one ever quoted policy mid-flight, especially not passengers. But Malik wasn't just any passenger. He was a strategic partner. His firm controlled a shipping contract worth millions to Vanguard's supply chain. And Nathan knew it. "Of course, sir. I'll gather the records now." As the supervisor hurried away, Malik leaned back, fingers steepled in thought. The dominoes were falling. Quietly. Precisely. Irrevocably. While Sandra Whitmore continued serving champagne to passengers who never noticed the power shift happening 2 rows behind them. By the time the plane began its descent, Malik's plan would be in full motion. And no one in uniform on this flight would be walking away untouched. The cabin lights dimmed as Flight 482 crossed into British airspace. Passengers adjusted their seats. Some glanced at their watches, thinking about meetings or family waiting at Heathrow. But Malik's focus was locked on the screen in front of him, not for entertainment, but for the secure video call, now connected to Jared Cross. Even mid-flight, even above the clouds, his network moved like clockwork. "Update me," Malik said quietly, Bluetooth earpiece in place. Jared's face appeared, cool and collected as always. "We've secured the internal logs. Whitmore's prior complaints were closed without proper documentation. 2 HR staff members involved in those closures have connections to Vanguard's former compliance officer." Malik nodded slowly. "Not just individual failure, organized cover-up. We also pulled Vanguard's discrimination settlement history. 3 undisclosed payouts over the past 5 years. 2 involved in-flight service complaints. So this wasn't isolated. This wasn't rare. It was a pattern. Passengers dismissed. Complaints buried. Silence rewarded with vouchers and NDAs." Jared continued, "Legal team has drafted a formal review notice. If you approve, it will trigger Vanguard's contractual obligation to initiate an independent investigation upon landing." Malik didn't hesitate. "Approved." Jared's eyes narrowed, voice lowering. "And the board?" "I want the report sent directly to the board chair. Bypass standard channels. No PR, no spin." Jared smirked slightly. "They won't see it coming." "They never do." Malik ended the call. The other passengers remained oblivious. Someone chuckled softly at a business podcast playing over their headphones. Another typed emails about profits and mergers, unaware that a different kind of negotiation was unfolding beside them. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about principle, visibility, consequences. Vanguard Air had gambled that their silent biases and lazy cover-ups would go unnoticed, or at least unchallenged. They had picked the wrong flight, the wrong day, the wrong man. And now? The landing gear wasn't the only thing descending. Careers were about to come crashing down too. The captain's voice crackled softly over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be landing at Heathrow shortly. Please return your seats to the upright position and secure all personal items." Malik didn't move. He didn't need to. His next move had already been set in motion. From the corner of his eye, he noticed Sandra Whitmore smiling as she collected empty glasses and napkins from the first-class cabin. She looked calm, comfortable, as if nothing had happened. As if the sandwich she had served him hours ago was just another quiet insult that would be forgotten by the time the wheels touched the runway. But it wouldn't be. Malik glanced down at his tablet. Jared's final message glowed on the screen. Board chair notified. HR team en route to meet flight 482. Corporate compliance and security will intercept lead crew. Audit officially triggered. Perfect. Sandra stopped by his row, the professional mask still perfectly in place. "Can I get you anything else before we land, Mr. Henderson?" she asked. Malik looked up at her, calm. "No, you've already given me everything I needed." She tilted her head, puzzled. But Malik didn't elaborate. There was no need. The plane descended smoothly, tires kissing the runway with a soft screech. Passengers gathered their belongings. Phones powered on. Heathrow's skyline peeked through the small windows, shining with the false promise of a normal ending. But for Sandra Whitmore and the management who thought they could hide her behavior, there would be no normal ending. As the aircraft taxied toward the gate, Malik spotted two figures waiting just beyond the jet bridge. Black suits, corporate compliance, and behind them, Vanguard's head of HR. Sandra didn't see them yet. Neither did the rest of the crew. But Malik did. And as the seatbelt sign chimed off and passengers rose to gather their bags, he remained seated, calm, focused. He didn't need to rush. The real arrival was just beginning. The cabin doors opened with a quiet hiss. Passengers filed out, none the wiser, smiling, stretching. Some thanked the crew as they passed by. A few even nodded at Sandra Whitmore, complimenting her excellent service. Malik stayed seated, watching, waiting. Sandra moved toward the galley, preparing to disembark. She didn't notice the two compliance officers flanking the jet bridge. She didn't notice the HR director reviewing a file folder, her file. But Nathan Price, the senior cabin supervisor, did. His face drained of color the moment he stepped out and spotted the waiting team. His confident stride faltered. One of the compliance officers approached him quietly. A brief exchange. Nathan's eyes darted back toward the aircraft, then settled on Malik for a fraction of a second. He understood. Malik didn't blink. The HR director entered the cabin, speaking in a low, firm voice. "Miss Whitmore, Mr. Price, we'll need a moment of your time before you proceed to the crew lounge." Sandra blinked, confused. "Is there an issue?" "Yes," the HR director replied. "And it's not a small one." Passengers continued streaming past, unaware that two careers were already unraveling behind them. Nathan tried to maintain composure. Sandra, still oblivious, began to protest. "If this is about the meal?" "It's not about a meal," the compliance officer cut in. "It's about a pattern." At that, Sandra finally looked toward Malik, eyes narrowing, searching. But Malik gave her nothing. No anger, no gloating. Just the quiet, unshakable presence of a man who had waited long enough for justice. As the last passenger exited, the compliance team gestured for the crew to follow. Their walk down the jet bridge felt heavier than the thousands of miles they had just flown. Malik stood, collected his briefcase, and followed at a measured pace. But he didn't follow them into the conference room. He didn't need to. His work here was done. By the time Malik reached the executive lounge, his phone buzzed with the final update. Sandra Whitmore and Nathan Price suspended. HR launching full inquiry. Compliance review extended to prior flight complaints. Board has initiated public accountability review. Translation: they weren't just addressing his incident. They were addressing every suppressed complaint, every quiet dismissal, every pattern they thought would stay hidden forever. Malik didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. This wasn't a victory. It was a correction. A long overdue correction. Vanguard Air would now be forced to reckon with more than just a PR nightmare. Their culture, the one that had quietly tolerated exclusion, dismissal, and bias, was now under the spotlight. And not because Malik Henderson shouted, not because he demanded apologies or posted viral rants, but because he moved the way real power moves. Quietly, strategically, unapologetically. As he sipped his espresso in the lounge, watching planes taxi across the tarmac, Jared's last message came through. The board chair just asked for a meeting. Privately, they want to discuss cultural reform and a public apology. Shall I confirm? Malik typed a simple reply. Yes, but no meetings until the passengers who complained before me are acknowledged. All of them. Because this wasn't just about Malik. It was about the passengers who had no power, no leverage. The ones who had accepted silence because they thought they had no choice. Not anymore. Sandra and Nathan had dismissed him as just another face in the crowd. But they forgot the most important rule of quiet power. The moment you underestimate it, it rewrites the rules. If this story struck a chord with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Real change starts with visibility. Let's make sure no one's quiet disrespect ever goes unanswered again.